Okay, so make sure you completed your chart correctly. Go ahead and look at your stuff to make sure these are right because these are the points we're going to be plotting when we graph sine, cosine, and tangent. So these are your x values and these are going to be your y values. So in standard form, so today we're graphing. So in standard form, there's no number right here in front of your sine function. So we say your amplitude is 1. Your period is always a 2 pi. And your midline is always the axis, which is y equals 0. So what I do is I go ahead and I make 4 marks. But since this is so small, I'm going to go ahead and make 8. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So then I put the 8th mark as 2 pi. My 4th mark is going to get half of that. So I always put my period on that mark and then half of it on this mark just so I know. Then I'm going to go up 1 and down 1. So I'm going to make it 2 so it's easier for us to see. So 2 units is going to be 1. So we're going to plot the point 0, 0. And then at pi over 2, we have to go up to 1. At pi, I'm at 0. At 3 pi over 2, which is right here, I'm down at -1. And at 2 pi, we're at 0. So I just plotted those dots, and we're going to go ahead and connect them in a smooth curve. And this pattern, remember, like sine and cosine continues forever. So really, if I wanted to, I could have plotted more dots. It continues in this pattern in both directions forever and ever. Well, I guess this needs to go all the way down here. And same thing in this direction. It goes down and back up over here too. So cosine, also amplitude of 1 because there's no number. Our period in standard form is a 2 pi, and our midline is 0 because there's no up and down movement. So these are going to have the same markings. The 8th mark will get a 2 pi. My 4th mark will get a pi. And I'm going to plot these dots. Right here. So at 0, I'm up at 1. And the next one, I go to 0. And then down to -1. And then 0. And then back up at 1. And this also continues in the same pattern forever. I should have put arrows on these up here. And then arrows here, because this one would also go to here, and then down to here, and then up, and so on. And the pattern continues in both of these directions. Okay. So what the definition of these are, I'm going to go ahead and use Miss Bessie's notes for this section because she has such good handwriting. So an amplitude is your vertical height of the function from your midline to the max or the min. So it's like this distance right here would be considered your amplitude. Your period is your horizontal length of one cycle of a function. So that's from here to here. Do you see how she has it boxed right there? Up here, it's boxed. So it's how long it takes you to go one full cycle up and down. This one goes like down and then back up. Your midline is your imaginary dotted line that splits your graph in half. So this right here splits my graph in half. So midline is the line that splits your graph right in half. So when we have these functions down here, this is what your general function actually looks like for your stuff. So A is always my amplitude. That's how high up and down we'll go from the midline. Period is 2 pi divided by this number, and that's always our last mark, what we put on it. And then if there's any up and down movement right here, that will be our midline. All right, so on to our back. Graphing tangent now. So to graph tangent, we're going to have these here. So let's go ahead and I'm going to do tangent's a little bit smaller, but we'll do our 4th mark is pi and then 2 pi still. So I'm going to do 1 and -1. And so it says tangent at 0 is 0. So I'm going to put a dot here. It tells me at pi over 2 it's undefined, so it's a dotted line. And then pi at 0 is 0. 3 pi over 2 it's undefined. And then at 2 pi it's 0. You could plot more dots on these if you wanted to get your tangent, but your tangent always just looks like this. It looks almost like an x cubed graph following your two dotted lines. So then this pattern would continue over here if I wanted to. It would go up like that. And this one comes down here. And if I wanted to continue it, it would also go down like that on that side right there. So what's a little bit different for tangent is that tangent will not have an amplitude because you see it just goes up forever and ever. So there's never an amplitude. So my period is just pi because it only takes half of the time from here to here is only a pi unit. The other ones were 2 pi. And my midline is still at the 0 because there's no up and down movement. So period on these is pi over your b now instead of 2 pi over b. And my midline is still that c line when we do it. So we're going to go ahead and identify some midline periods, amplitudes, and shapes of each function. So sine shape is the one that goes like this, It starts at 0, 0. The shape of cosine is one that looks like a wave. And the shape of tangent looks like an x cubed graph. Like that. All right, period is 2 pi divided by this number. So 2 pi over 2 would be pi. 2 pi divided by a half. Instead of dividing by a half, you should multiply by 2. So we get 4 pi. And tangent is pi over 1/4, which gives you 4 pi. My midline is this number in here. So midline is at -3. This midline is at 0 because there's no number back here. This midline is at -3. My amplitude is a number out in front here, so that's a 4. This amplitude's a 1/5, or it's really tiny. Remember, tangent does not have an amplitude, so that's why there's nothing there. So down here, we're going to look at the graphs, and we're going to identify the same information. So this one right here has to be a cosine function because it looks like a wave. So this has to be a cosine of x. This one is like the x cubed graph, so we're going to say this is the tangent graph, and then this one is going to be a sine graph. All right, my period is how long it takes to go from here to here. So that number right there tells us, right now it's catching up with me. So here to here, so that's a 3 pi unit. So tangent, remember, is just one cycle right here. So pi to 3 pi, that's 2 pi lengths. Right, so from here to here would be 2 pi's. And then my period here goes from here to here, so it is also a 2 pi. My midline is like what's in the middle, so this is a 0 line. And this midline is right here, so that's a y equals -5. And this midline is right here, so that's a y equals 2. Amplitude is how high up it goes from the midline, so that's up here to here, that's a 4. This one does not have amplitude. This one from here to here is a unit of 2.